What if her greatest hits weren't songs at all, but graves for the men who stood too close? What if every chorus carried more than melody? What if it carried a soul? What if her music never fades? Because those souls never escape. Why do I ask? Because I was there. I heard my own voice break beneath hers, pulled apart, erased, until I became part of the sound. Now I'll tell you the truth. The songs you worship aren't written in ink. She'll write you in a blank space that you'll never escape. I never thought I'd get this close to greatness. Not the kind of greatness you see in magazines or billboards, but the kind that reshapes culture, that defines eras. The call came late one night while I was half asleep over my laptop, tinkering with some small-time mixes. "You're wanted in Nashville," the voice said. "Studio sessions. Confidential. You'll be briefed when you arrive." Nashville meant one thing. I knew before he said her name. Taylor Swift. Every young engineer dreams of that moment, the chance to sit behind the glass while she records, to contribute even one knob twist to the kind of music that rewrites history. I told myself I'd keep calm, stay professional, prove I belonged. But the truth is, I packed my bags with shaking hands. When I arrived at the studio, the first thing I noticed wasn't the glamour, but the silence. It was a building tucked between nondescript offices, almost hidden, the kind of place you'd drive past without ever realizing what it held. Inside, the walls were padded not just for soundproofing, but for secrecy. It smelled faintly of cedar and cold air, like a church where the prayers had long since soured. The staff greeted me politely, but no one lingered. Men avoided eye contact. Assistants gave short nods, hustling away as though a stopwatch counted down behind their eyes. One technician whispered instructions in my ear. "Don't replay raw takes unless asked. Don't adjust levels without her say. Don't stay in the room if you don't have to." Then he handed me a key card and left without another word. That was my first taste of it. The unspoken rules. They were never written down, but they carried more weight than any contract. The first session began at dusk. Taylor arrived without fanfare, wearing black, her hair tied back as if she'd walked out of one of her own shadows. Everyone cleared out at once. I was alone at the board when she stepped inside the vocal booth, adjusted the mic, and simply said, "Track 4. Her voice filled the headphones, clear, precise, devastating. Every syllable seemed to land exactly where it belonged, like the sound itself bent to her will. I sat frozen, trying not to breathe too loudly as she sang, but somewhere in the middle of the take, my chest tightened. Behind her soaring notes, I swore I heard something else. A sigh, barely audible, male, low, almost pleading. I glanced at the waveform on the screen, nothing but her track. No background noise, no bleed. I shook my head, told myself it was fatigue, a trick of the ear. I kept my focus on the knobs, but the unease lodged itself deep. When the session ended, she left without a word. The room felt heavier after she was gone, as though she'd pressed something invisible into the air. The next night, the whispers returned, this time clearer. "Help me." I froze, fingers hovering over the fader. The words didn't match the lyrics, didn't belong to her at all. They lived under the melody, faint but undeniable, a voice that wasn't supposed to be there. "Playback," she instructed calmly. I obeyed, replaying the take. To my horror, the whisper vanished. Just her voice, flawless and radiant, no trace of what I'd heard. She looked at me through the glass, her gaze steady, unreadable. "Again," she said. I ran the track again. Nothing. When she finally left, I sat there replaying the recording a dozen times, ears pressed close, desperate to catch that breath, that plea. Nothing. Just her voice, soaring and merciless. By the end of the week, I realized I wasn't the only one unraveling. One assistant quit suddenly, leaving his badge on the desk without explanation. Another, a quiet guy named Marcos, started muttering to himself in the halls. One night I heard him say, "She's in me now. She won't let go." The next morning, he was gone. No goodbyes, no explanation. His name was never mentioned again. I told myself I wouldn't end up like them. I was stronger, smarter, more careful. But I couldn't ignore the headaches that bloomed after every session. The sleepless nights filled with echoes of her voice looping endlessly in my head. Sometimes I caught myself humming her lines without realizing it, the words spilling out of me like they belonged there all along. It wasn't just her singing, it was her presence. Taylor never shouted, never lost patience. She didn't need to. Her silences were louder than screams. She could lean over my chair, saying nothing, and my hands would tremble on the controls. She would hum a note, holding it until my chest vibrated with unease, and then softly say, "Not yet." Again, her questions cut sharper than commands. "Are you sure you heard that right?" "Play it again." Doubt seeped into my bones. I started second-guessing everything, my ears, my memory, even the sound of my own voice. The studio had its own gravity. By the second week, I could feel it pulling at me even before I swiped my badge at the door. The air inside was heavy, thick with a silence that didn't belong to silence at all, but to watchfulness. Everyone seemed to move with their heads down, their voices hushed. It wasn't reverence, it was survival. I wasn't the only one to notice it. A veteran producer named Raymond sat with me in the lounge one morning before a session, his coffee trembling in his hands. He didn't look me in the eye when he spoke. "Keep your head low," he muttered. "Don't stand too close when she's working. Don't give her a reason to look at you." I asked what he meant, but he just shook his head, as if the words had already cost him too much. That night, I found out what he meant. We were running through takes, Taylor behind the glass, Raymond at the board. Everything seemed fine until she stopped mid-chorus, her hands shooting up. The red light blinked out. Raymond turned the fader down. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tight. She leaned toward the mic. Her voice was calm, steady, but it froze the room. "You're off by half a second." Raymond frowned, adjusted the timeline. "It's locked to grid. The tempo's exact." Her gaze sharpened through the glass. She didn't raise her voice, but the silence that followed was louder than any scream. The air seemed to constrict. Raymond adjusted again, his fingers clumsy on the controls. "See?" Right there, Taylor tilted her head slowly, as if listening to something only she could hear. "Wrong." Raymond swallowed. His hand hovered over the mouse, paralyzed. For a moment, I thought he'd push back, explain, insist the grid didn't lie. But then I saw his jaw tremble, the color drained from his face. He nodded, adjusted the track again. Taylor watched him crumble, then gave a small, satisfied nod. "Better." The session resumed, but Raymond was gone the next day. His badge never beeped green again. After that, I started to see it everywhere. These fractures in the air when she was near. Once, a PA ran in with her food order, a salad and sparkling water. I was in the hallway, close enough to hear. She lifted the lid, stared at it, then looked at the PA without a word. The silence stretched until sweat beaded down his temple. Finally, she pushed the container back toward him. "Leaves are wilted." Her tone wasn't angry. It was dismissive, surgical. The PA stammered, apologized, promised to fix it. She didn't reply, just turned away. But the man's face looked as if he'd been slapped. I saw him in the parking lot later that night, smoking one cigarette after another with shaking hands. It wasn't the words. It was the weight behind them, the unspoken understanding that she could crush you without ever raising her voice. Even when she smiled, it wasn't comfort. One engineer cracked a nervous joke during a break, something harmless about how many coffee cups littered the studio. Taylor laughed, a soft melodic sound, but her eyes never left him, and the laughter didn't touch her face. He went quiet instantly. staring at the floor until she looked away. Another night, she brushed past an assistant carrying cables. The coils slipped, clattering against the floor. She paused, looking down at him with an expression that wasn't rage, but disappointment so sharp it might as well have been a blade. "Clumsy," she said quietly. Then she kept walking. The assistant's hands shook so badly he dropped the cables again. By the next day, he was working out of sight, demoted to errands. The more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just control. It was disdain. Men existed in her space only to serve, to execute, to obey. The moment they faltered, they disappeared. By the end of week 2, the studio staff felt like ghosts, drifting in and out, avoiding eye contact, never raising their voices above a whisper. The room smelled faintly of fear, like sweat locked into fabric. I told myself I'd stay professional, that I wouldn't get caught in her gaze, that I'd just do my job. But Taylor had a way of pulling attention without effort. Even when she wasn't speaking, her presence pressed down on the room. One evening, I overheard her in a side room with a manager I didn't recognize. Her voice was quiet but edged with finality. "Sloppy. You should know better. If you can't keep up, you don't belong here." The man mumbled something I couldn't catch. Then silence. When I dared glance down the hall, I saw him leave with his head bowed, his entire frame sagging as if hollowed out. She remained seated, expression calm, sipping from her glass as if nothing had happened. That was when I began to understand. She didn't need to shout. Silence was her weapon. Disdain was her scalpel. And all the while, the recordings kept gnawing at me. One night, I stayed late to clean up the session files. As the tracks exported, I let one run longer than usual, catching a sliver of audio beyond the fade. My blood froze. It was a man's voice, distorted but unmistakable. "Don't let me die in here." The words rattled in my chest. I yanked off the headphones, heart pounding, but when I replayed it, the voice was gone. That's when I realized it. Her songs didn't just sound haunting. They carried something, something alive. I tried to brush it off, bury myself in the work, but the whispers kept growing. Faint breaths under the chorus, a muttered name in the bridge. Once, I swear I heard my own voice, warped and begging. By then, I knew I should have walked away, but it was already too late, because Taylor had noticed me. The next night, she stayed behind after everyone else cleared out. Her eyes locked on mine through the glass. She didn't smile, didn't blink, just stared until I couldn't breathe. Then she spoke into the mic, her voice calm, steady. "Stay." I stayed. That was the night everything changed. The night she told me to stay, the studio emptied like a tide going out. The others filed out quietly, badges clipped off, bags slung over tired shoulders. No one looked back. It felt deliberate, as if they all knew what was about to happen and wanted no part of it. Taylor remained behind the glass, perfectly still. Her hands rested lightly on the mic stand, her eyes locked onto mine. The red recording light wasn't on, but the silence that filled the room felt louder than any session I'd sat through. I swallowed, waiting for her to speak. "Play it," she said softly. I blinked. "Which track?" Her lips curved the faintest degree. "The one you keep replaying." My stomach knotted. She knew. She always knew. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, reluctant, but I cued the track. The monitors filled with her vocals, clear, soaring, flawless. But just past the bridge, there it was again, the voice. A man's voice, faint, breaking through the melody like a ghost fighting to surface. "Don't let me die in here." It was unmistakable this time. I froze, waiting for her to stop me, to deny it. But Taylor only tilted her head, listening, calm, patient, almost indulgent. "You hear him," she said. Not a question. My throat tightened. "Who is it?" She stepped back from the mic, folding her arms. Someone who thought he was too clever, thought he could play games with me. Her tone carried no anger, no heat, just certainty. He wanted to trap me, to bind me in his song. But you don't bind me. I bind you. I couldn't breathe. What did you do to him? She smiled faintly, her eyes never leaving mine. I wrote him down, that's all. Once you're written, you belong to me. Her words lodged in my chest like a hook. I thought of the rumors, the whispered names that circled her over the years. Men who'd burned out, broken down, vanished. They were jokes to the world, gossip fodder. But here, in this room, it felt different. It felt real. I found my voice, though it shook. That voice, it sounded like... She cut me off. Don't say his name. He's gone. I took what I needed. The rest was discarded. The calmness of her delivery chilled me more than any scream could have. She wasn't confessing. She was teaching. Why can I hear him? I asked. Her eyes softened, and for the first time I felt her interest sharpen like a scalpel turned toward me. Because you're listening too closely. You've always been listening. That's why you're still here, when the others are not. She walked out of the booth, the door whispering shut behind her. Suddenly she was in the control room with me, her presence heavy, filling every corner. Do you want to know what happens next? She asked. I couldn't answer. My body felt pinned to the chair. She reached into her bag and pulled something out, a pen. But it wasn't like any pen I'd seen. Its surface wasn't black ink, it was blackness itself. Looking at it was like staring into an absence, a void that drank the light around it. My eyes recoiled, yet I couldn't look away. Do you want me to write your name? She asked. The word slithered into me, cold and intoxicating. My first thought was no. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight. But my body didn't move. Her voice held me, pressing down until my resistance felt childish, laughable. My mouth was dry. What happens if you do? She smiled again, serene. Then you'll stop hearing the voices. You'll stop doubting yourself. You'll be free of the weight. My songs will carry you. You'll never fade. The pen gleamed, or rather, it swallowed gleam. She held it loosely, as if it weighed nothing, but I could feel the gravity of it pulling at me. Behind us, the monitors hissed with static. For a moment, I swore I heard the man's voice again, desperate, clawing for release. Don't let me die in here. Taylor leaned closer, whispering. He fought. That's why you still hear him. You don't have to fight. You can choose. You can give yourself willingly. The pen hovered above a scrap of paper on the console, her hand steady. My pulse thundered in my ears. Say it, she murmured. Say you want me to write it. My chest heaved. I looked at the monitors, the waveforms trembling like a flat line. I thought of all the men who'd come before, all the ones who'd disappeared, their voices buried under her choruses. I thought of Raymond, his trembling coffee cup, the PA smoking frantically in the parking lot, the assistant demoted for dropping cables, each one hollowed out, each one erased. Was this what they'd seen too? The pen? The choice? Taylor's eyes locked onto mine, patient, eternal. Do you want me to write your name? The silence pressed in. My throat tightened. My resistance crumbled. Yes, I whispered. She smiled wider, tilting her head the way I'd seen her do in interviews, but now it felt predatory. She placed the tip of the black pen against the page. In that moment, the voices in the monitors howled, rising into a cacophony. Don't let me die in here, they screamed, overlapping, twisting, begging. I flinched, my hands flying to my ears, but Taylor only pressed the pen harder into the paper, unhurried, steady. Listen, she said. Her tone was firm now, commanding. Listen again. I lowered my hands, shaking. The monitors hissed, but the voices were gone. Silence, pure and endless. Only her song remained. Her gaze softened, almost tender. There. Isn't that better? I nodded weakly. My body slumped into the chair, drained, empty. What do you hear now? She asked. I opened my mouth. The words came without thought, automatic, like she'd placed them there herself. Nothing. I don't hear anything. Her smile deepened, satisfied. She closed the pen, sliding it back into her bag as if it had never existed. "Good," she whispered. The session light blinked red. Taylor leaned back in her chair, closing the black pen and slipping it into her bag as if it were nothing more than a ballpoint. The red recording light on the console glowed faintly, casting the room in a strange, almost sacred haze. She smiled, satisfied, serene, and nodded. "Good," she said softly. That was all. No applause, no grand gesture. Just one word, and the weight of the studio lifted. The pressure that had been suffocating me for weeks eased as if it had never existed. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. When she finally left, I stayed behind, staring at the console, at the paper where the pen had pressed. My name wasn't there. Not exactly. It was something else, something unreadable. The letters more like shadows than ink, faint but undeniable. Looking at it made my eyes ache, like staring into an eclipse. I closed the notebook, slid it back where it came from, and told myself to forget. That was the first lie I told myself that night. The days that followed blurred into one another. Taylor recorded. I engineered. No one questioned me anymore. No one whispered warnings in my ear. The staff who remained avoided me now, the way they avoided her. Their eyes flicked over me and away again, like I'd become something they didn't want to acknowledge. The voices were gone. The whispers under the tracks, the sighs between the verses, the desperate cries. They'd all vanished, scrubbed clean. The song sounded perfect, too perfect. I told myself that was what I wanted. Peace, clarity, silence. But silence is its own kind of prison. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying her words. "Do you want me to write your name?" I told her yes, and in that moment, I'd felt something leave me. I couldn't explain what, but I knew it was mine, and I'd never get it back. And yet, I couldn't regret it. The sessions continued, and her songs grew sharper, bigger, unstoppable. Each chorus landed with an invisible weight. Each lyric carried a pulse beneath it that no one else seemed to notice. She was unstoppable, untouchable. Watching her rise was like watching a tide swallow the shore. Inevitable, merciless, magnificent. I understood now why the world called her a genius. It wasn't genius. It was something older, something that used me as easily as it had used the ones before me. I stopped fighting it. Weeks turned into months. I thought I might leave the studio, go back to smaller projects, rebuild myself. But every time I considered walking away, the pen came back to me in memory. That black nothingness, the way it seemed to drink the light, the way it swallowed the voice of the man who came before me. I knew that if I left, I'd never truly escape. My name was already written, even if no one else could see it. So I stayed. Her song soared. Tour dates sold out in seconds. Awards piled up. Fans worshipped her as if she were untouchable, unbreakable, eternal. They screamed her lyrics, tattooed her words into their skin, built their identities around the melodies she crafted. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't hear what I heard. When people asked what it was like working with her, I smiled politely and said it was an honor. That was easier than explaining the truth, that every note I played back wasn't just music, but a grave marker, that each bridge carried something more than melody. It carried the weight of a man erased. They didn't want that truth anyway. They wanted the myth, and I had become part of it. One night, long after she'd left, I sat alone in the control room. The studio was dark, lit only by the glow of the console. I pulled up one of her new tracks, letting it fill the room. Her voice wrapped around me, clean and flawless. No whispers, no cries, just her. For a moment, I let myself drift into it. The sound pressed against me, warm and suffocating. And then I realized I wasn't listening to the song. I was listening for myself. But there was nothing. No echo, no breath, no trace. I'd been erased so completely I couldn't even find the outline of my own voice beneath hers. That was the true horror. Not the screams, not the whispers, not the pleading voices trapped inside the music. The horror was silence. I think about Raymond sometimes. The PA with the salad, the assistant with the cables, the manager who slunk out of the lounge. They all vanished in different ways, but the end was always the same. Erasure. Absence. I survived only because I submitted. I let her write me down. I let her pen carve me out. Now, when her songs play on the radio or blast from car stereos, I don't flinch. I don't even hum along. I just listen, knowing the truth. That the songs don't live because of her voice. They live because of the names written in that black nothingness. Names no one will ever read. My name among them. Taylor will go on. She'll grow more famous, more powerful, more adored. Her tours will shatter records. Her albums will define generations. People will write books and documentaries about her genius, about how she captured something no one else could. They'll be right in their way. She did capture something, but they'll never understand what it cost. Because no matter how high she rises, no matter how many charts she conquers, no matter how many millions chant her words in stadiums around the world, none of it compares to the real source of her power. Not her voice, not her fame, her pen,